Hi students, today's lecture is on Wordsworth, but not Wordsworth is a poet of nature, Wordsworth is a great poet, but in this class we are going to study in the aspect of literary criticism, and in that coverage of literary criticism Wordsworth has also to play a greater part, and that is Wordsworth's view on nature, his views regarding the subject matter of poetry, the nature of poetry, as well as the definition of poetry as said by Wordsworth in totality. We will discuss these things. And it is very important for all the English literature scholars, for any examinations. Fine. Now, we all know that Wordsworth had revolted against the very excessive diction which was used by the 18th century poetry. It was a great revolution. We all know that the Lyrical Ballads, when it came by Wordsworth and Coleridge, it was a romantic era. And Wordsworth's famous pronouncement, and what was that pronouncement? We all know, quote unquote, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and that it takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. This basically the concept, this arrival of the new school of poetry which is known as the Romantic school, where Wordsworth had laid a very special emphasis on the powerful emotions, on the intense feelings, and even the qualities which the poetry of the preceding means the 18th century age of reason, that age was lacking. Now in this age, the age of romantic revival, Wordsworth started from again an interest in life rather than in art, which was the concept of the previous age. And the word spontaneous in Wordsworth's definition does not mean immediate or sudden. The word spontaneous in Wordsworth's definition does not mean immediate, does not mean sudden. It actually implies natural and unforced. Unforced. And the poet who has the capacity to reconstruct his earlier emotions and feelings is not solely concerned with the imitation of the external, because his art externalizes the internal, and the feelings are the primary source of the poetic creation which he has created. So this is the concept which all my students have to understand as far as the literary criticism part is concerned, and here Wordsworth today is the topic with blending of the criticism part. Fine. And in the process of, the artistic creation, the observation is actually the first step. किसी चीज को ऑब्जर्व करना minutely. And we all know that the poet had more than the usual sensibility, who was observing the objects of the external world. And this process of observation implies the reaction of the external objects upon the poet's sensibility, and then it gives rise to certain feelings, certain emotions. And instead of communicating these feelings and emotions immediately to the readers, the poet allows them to settle in mind. And that process of meditation, that meditative quality that follows that original emotions, that original feelings, and that too because of the interactions between them and the thoughts, are basically transformed. And the earlier emotions, the earlier feelings are now spiritualized. It is going towards the divinity, the divine. Fine. जिसको कि एक टर्म है pantheism, the pantheistic quality of Wordsworth's poetry. That is, God is present in nature. Each and every object has God, has divinity. So the impressions a poet is receiving from the observations of the objects are spiritualized. And whenever in some tranquil moments, these images are recalled by the original impressions, the feelings, the impressions, the emotions, which are also accompanying them, are also revived in his memories. So that emotion, that creativity, that recreation and emotion belongs to the poet. And as he composes a poem, he lives through his original experience, which is now existing in a very idealized form. And this artistic creation to Wordsworth has been known as a complex process of observations, impressions, feelings, thoughts, and their interactions. For example, some of his poems like Tintern Abbey are the examples where we can say that poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility. Fine. So these are the things which has to be understood in this subject matter. Now, next, as I have told you, we will discuss about Wordsworth's concept of the subject matter of poetry. Now, if you remember, students, preface to the Lyrical Ballads. Preface to in the preface to the Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth ने कहा है, Wordsworth says, क्या कहा है? That the principal object in these poems was to choose incidents and situations from the common life and to relate and to describe them throughout as far as possible in a selection of language really used by men. So this is a very important, these are important lines for every student to remember, and this is written in his preface to the Lyrical Ballads. The statement of Wordsworth forms actually the credo of his critical theories, which has been defended and even attacked by the coming critics all over. And the poems of the Lyrical Ballads, which stands as a landmark in the history of English poetry, those poems indicate a clear-cut departure from the established traditions of the neoclassical age of Dryden and Pope, which we have already discussed. क्लियर कट डिपार्चर दिख रहा है कि ड्राइडन और पोप का जो 18th सेंचुरी ट्रांजिशनल फेज था, क्लासिकल एज था, न्यू क्लासिकल एज था, उससे कहीं दूर चला गया है, हट गया है. एंड द पोएट्स ऑफ द न्यू क्लासिकल एज described in their poetry the artificiality, the unnatural life of the fashionable lords and ladies who are living in the city of London, and they did not care about the beauties of nature, about the humble rustics, about the peasants, about the shepherds, and all those who lived a simple life in the lap of nature. They were against it. And so their poetry was thus very, very limited in scope. It had its boundaries because they had very limited extension of it. And here what happened, that Wordsworth reacted very sharply against this practice and tried to enlarge and react by enhancing the scope and the range of English poetry by taking his themes from the humble and the rustic life. And what happened then? He was very much against, he revolted against the new classical trends and traditions. So he, first of all, discarded, thrown away out the gaudy, full of verbosity, ambiguity, the phraseology, the artificial dictions, the sophisticated themes, the phrases of the new classical poetry, and introduced a lot of freshness, a lot of lucidity, a lot of vitality, and a lot of lyricism, lot of human touch, lot of nature, lot of emotions, lot of passions, by dealing with the simple and the natural life of the farmers, of the peasants, of the highland girls, of the cottagers, of the human people, of the human life, of the common people of the rustic life. Because he knew life from very close quarters. He loved life very tenderly. And that is why he could render in his poetry that realism, that feeling, that original fervor. And by transferring those simplicity, whether it was in theme or treatment in his poetry, he was a successful poet, he was a successful man in giving a new fresh vigor, in revitalizing the English poetry and enlarging its range, enlarging its scope. And you must know that there have been many reasons why Wordsworth chose incidents and situations from the humble life, from the rustic life, as themes of his poetry. A poet, according to Wordsworth, is essentially a man speaking to men. एक इंसान अपने fellow men से बात कर रहा है. ये होता है poet according to Wordsworth. And so this poet's duty, or we can say his first duty, is to trace those primary things of human nature which govern everything. And these primary instincts and impulses which always and will be always governing the human behavior can be studied in its simplest form, and that are considered to be the most elementary forms of life. And if we say in simple words that in the simple and the humble rustic life, the original passions, the fundamental passions of the human heart, they find a very smooth and natural and harmonious development. Because in the simple and the natural landscape of the life of a villager, the behavior is different, the passion is different, which is very sincere, which is very unsophisticated. And that is actually the natural expression which Wordsworth is talking about. Because these rustics are actually free from all the external influences, and that is why they could speak their own personal experiences, and their passions are less under restraint.